Right now, battle at the border. Some residents along the southern border and immigrant activists criticize the state's ongoing efforts to prevent people from crossing into Texas illegally. One-on-one, we speak with Fort Worth Mayor Mattie Parker about the newly proposed city budget for next year, what she thinks about cutting the property tax rate by the largest amount yet. And debate debut. Republican presidential candidates square off in their first debate without the frontrunner, former President Donald Trump. The impact this will have on the GOP primary. I'm Jack Fink. Get your fix for Texas politics. You're watching Eye on Politics on CBS News Texas. Hello and welcome. Republican presidential candidates squared off for their first time on the road to the White House. The frontrunner in the polls, former President Donald Trump, did not take part and instead did an interview with Tucker Carlson. And former Texas Congressman Will Hurd, who's also running, did not qualify for the debate as he had hoped when we spoke with him last week. Some residents who live along the Texas border and immigrant activists are once again criticizing and challenging the state's efforts to keep people from crossing into the U.S. illegally. Ken Molestina has the story.
This doesn't work. This is just tactics.
A complete misappropriation and misapplication of the criminal justice system to attempt to deter and punish immigration into Texas.
Those are just some of the most recent comments a group of immigration advocates are lobbying as they push to end Operation Lone Star. The operation, launched by Governor Greg Abbott 2.5 years ago, calls on Texas DPS troopers, the National Guard, and out-of-state law enforcement to help secure the border.
So Operation Lone Star 2.0 is not only more deadly in terms of its use of concertina wire and the buoys that are clearly designed to funnel our clients into arrest locations.
Those in favor of ending it are specifically taking issue at what they describe as a militarization of our southern border with Mexico and the tactics used to stop migrants from illegally crossing into the U.S. They're also saying the price tag of billions of dollars so far is excessive.
Texas deserves effective state leadership, not Operation Lone Star's waste. It's time for Governor Abbott to stop diverting critical funding for the education and healthcare systems we deserve.
And the reason why we're facing criticism, because what we're doing is making an impact. It's making a positive impact.
Lieutenant Christopher Olivares is a DPS spokesman who shared these numbers with us. Since the start of Operation Lone Star, they've logged more than 420,000 illegal immigration apprehensions, more than 33,000 criminal arrests, and close to 9,000 criminal trespass arrests.
The facts are that the federal government has neglected to secure the border. That's why we had to step in.
As for the floating barrier, Lieutenant Olivares says the decision from a federal judge either way will have long-lasting effects.
So we're going to continue maintaining operations. As far as the criticism and everything else that we've been facing, it's not going to slow us down.
Many cities across North Texas are now preparing to pass new budgets for next year. They include Fort Worth, where the city manager has proposed a record cut in the property tax rate while also adding police officers and firefighters. Jason Allen tells us the proposed general fund budget tops $1 billion for the first time.
After a summer highlighted by high-profile violent shootings and another hot season of critical fire danger, Fort Worth is planning big spending increases in 2024 for public safety. A new budget includes 76 new positions in the fire department, 106 new positions for police, a combined $55 million in increased spending for public safety, and a general budget that tops $1 billion for the first time.
It's going to take time. We're not going to be able to fill them right off. Jason, right now we're 141 positions down currently.
Police Chief Neil Noakes and City Manager David Cook highlighted additional spending increases for crisis intervention, the crime lab, and a unit working with the homeless. Property values have soared in Fort Worth, providing tens of millions in new revenue for the city, even though it plans to cut its tax rate again this year.
Because if you're a growing city, and as we talked about, there's always going to be more infrastructure needs and more service needs because you're serving more people.
To that end, Cook wants to double a neighborhood improvement program in 2024. There will be more money for mowing and litter pickup and more staff for animal services. Some bills will go up for Fort Worth residents, though, including for water and sewer rates. Nothing in this budget, though, is necessarily set in stone, and city officials and the public will start working through the finer details of it in public meetings and workshops that start later this week. In Fort Worth, Jason Allen, CBS News, Texas.
Coming up next, we go one-on-one with Fort Worth Mayor Mattie Parker. Her thoughts on the proposed cut in the property tax rate and increasing the size of the police and fire departments. And later, what impact will former President Donald Trump's decision not to take part in the first Republican presidential debate have on the 2024 GOP primary? Eye on Politics on CBS News Texas. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Fort Worth Mayor Mattie Parker is speaking out about the city's newly proposed budget for next year. We asked her if she believes homeowners will receive enough of a break on their city property taxes and why it's crucial for the city to expand its police and fire departments. Fort Worth Mayor Mattie Parker, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate your time as always. So you've outlined your priorities for the next budget and the city has proposed it. First, tell us about your priorities, what you want to accomplish this year.
Well, I think honestly, Jack, it's a continuation of what we started really last budget cycle to be the cleanest and safest city in the country. And that takes significant investment. As you can imagine, Fort Worth is the fastest growing city in America right now. We grow at a clip that's pretty mind-numbing, 100,000 people every 5 years. So first of all, I think of this budget as not just for fiscal year 2024, but also how do we make sure we're building a foundation and making the right investments in things that matter most to our residents for the next 10, 20, 30 years, well beyond my tenure as mayor. Number one is being really mindful of the rise in property taxes for our residents across the city of Fort Worth, but also balancing what we know as the fastest growing city, or what are the investments we have to make and be really good stewards of those tax dollars. So that's number one. And that includes reducing our tax rate right now by 4 cents, which we're incredibly proud of, to build upon the tax reductions or exemptions we created over the summer for those that are over 65 and disabled, increasing that exemption. Number two, I would mention is how do we make sure we're continuing to build a clean and safe city concept? And that's everything in litter abatement, homeless cleanup, affordability, all those things built into one. As a city, and this is something that every community across the country is really grappling with, is how do you make sure that you really promote the highest quality of life for residents? And that's certainly true in the city of Fort Worth. And then at the bedrock of any really smart city is public safety. And those are investments in police and firefighters, as well as our partnership with MedStar for ambulatory service in the city of Fort Worth. And in my opinion, those investments will ensure that this city continues to grow and prosper into the future. And I really have to say special thanks to our city departments that are really thinking bigger and more innovatively about how to make sure the city of Fort Worth is the type of city that all of us want to live in.
So how do your priorities match up with City Manager Dave Cook's budget proposal? Are you happy with it?
I am. I think that our city management team does an excellent job. Number one, they work alongside city council. So this process is really all year long. You cover City Hall, you know this. And they start these visiting sessions back in the spring. And we held a city council retreat and really set that big vision, which at the top is the highest quality of life for our residents in every single department and everything that we provide to our residents. And building upon that, how do you make sure city departments are really meeting the needs of our community? I work very closely with our city manager and his team to make sure that the budget as presented is closely aligned with city council. That doesn't mean that everything stays the same at presentation and that certain city council members or even myself want to push harder in specific areas. And that will all kind of shake itself out in the next month as we finalize the budget before the end of September.
And so, one of the priorities that you mentioned was property tax relief. We've heard this, obviously, the state legislature all the way down. And the city manager's proposal was to reduce the property tax rate by a full 4 cents, which would be the city's largest property tax rate decrease. But I'm wondering, when you look at the comparison of the average single family home in Fort Worth, because of rising property values, it went from just a little over $199,000 to over $228,000. And so just using the city's own calculus, property taxes, despite the rate cut, would still go up by $116 a year. Are you okay with that?
I think you have to balance what the needs for our residents are in a growing city. You cannot add over 100 police officers and 76 firefighters and cut revenue by up to 40 to $50 million, which is what some people are calling for in the no new revenue tax rate. And candidly, no one wants to touch public safety. That's 75% of our budget. So when I talk to residents, I think about this in my own home. Your property tax bill, 1/3 of that goes to the city of Fort Worth. That's everything from trash service, your streets and roads, your lights, public safety. We've already talked about those things, parks, libraries, etc. So for $116 more per year, are you getting what you need? Now, the important thing is we haven't set the tax rate yet, Jack. Yesterday, our vote really was to set the ceiling, and we could lower that more. And that's the process you're seeing, the scrub. Like, are we making sure we are fiscally conservative as possible while also making sure that we're planning for future generations in the city of Fort Worth? I think we're close to that right now. Look, if we weren't the fastest growing city in the country, we probably could cut that rate down. But it's a balance. And for some homes, it's $100 per year savings to cut $40 to $50 million out of the city budget to keep that level, that rate stable, is something that would be incredibly difficult for our city to do. And again, we're not finished yet. And I have several council members that are still looking at the budget closely to making sure it has everything in it that they've asked for, as well as balancing, to your conversation, which is important, around property tax rates. These are tough issues in the state of Texas. And I know our legislature is not really done with that yet either. We've got a referendum in November to finalize what the school property tax rates look like to continue to buy down what homeowners are paying every single year.
And so let's talk a little bit more about the new positions that the city has proposed for the police department and the fire department. So the police department, 106 new officers in the police department. And one of my colleagues, Jason Allen, spoke to Chief Noakes recently, who said that they were still down 140 positions. So now the city wants to add. And so my question is, there's a nationwide police shortage. There's a huge need across the country. How does Fort Worth plan on attracting new officers to the city to make up for the 140 positions that you're down, and then increase that by 106 positions on top of it?
It's all hands on deck, and it takes a variety of different initiatives to make sure we have the best police department in the country, which I believe we do right now. When it comes to recruitment, and I talk to colleagues across the country that serve as mayors or in leadership positions, this is probably the top concern for them when it comes to public safety. How do you recruit and retain top officers from the profession in an environment in some places that become increasingly more hostile? So number one, we're very thankful for our community members who support the 4th Police Department. And I know that Chief Noakes and his command staff have ensured that we've transitioned into a truly pro-police and pro-community model. Policing has changed in the 21st century. We all understand that. And we need to recruit the type of officers that really want to meet the needs of all community members. And we're doing that in the city of Fort Worth. Our applicants are still incredibly strong to get to the place we need to be every single year in those recruit classes. Number two is making sure the health and wellness of every officer is a top of mind. And I know that you probably talked to Chief Noakes, and when he talks about this, it's his primary objective as the leader of that department. So that's keeping our officers in place for their 25 years or a little bit longer if they choose to stay with our department. And lastly is making sure our pay is competitive. We increased cadet pay last year, which was incredibly important to be on par with other North Texas cities. So they're getting paid adequately while they're in the academy. And when they come out, we know our pay is also competitive as well. And then lastly is making sure we're reaching down into the community. Our cadet program within high schools is incredibly effective. We're seeing those young people go through their education and then come back to be officers at the city of Fort Worth. That's the goal of those programs. Those homegrown heroes, as we like to call them. And Assistant Chief Julie Swearingen has done an excellent job leading those efforts in recruitment and retention for officers. So every year you have to stay vigilant with this, and it also requires you to put additional investment, which is why you're seeing over 100 officers added into this year's budget to make sure we're keeping up with retirements as well.
It's been a tough summer in Fort Worth as far as some unfortunate, very high profile crimes. And I'm wondering, was there anything that you personally learned out of this and that you have pushed the department to make some changes?
Well, you're probably referring to the tragedy on July 3rd, in one incident in particular, in Como. And gun violence is prolific across the entire country, especially when it comes to youth gun violence. You're always prepared for the summer to be more difficult. And that certainly proved to be true in the city of Fort Worth. But I know that coupled with our technology and our officers and the focus we've had, we're coming on the other side of this. We still see a dramatic reduction in violent crime in the city of Fort Worth, which I know as a resident here, as someone that's raising young children, again, public safety is the bedrock of any city. And I know that we're headed the right direction. In terms of what I learned, I think with these larger events, the city of Fort Worth Police Department, likely working alongside community, has to dictate what public safety looks like to keep everyone safe. We're not trying to keep anybody from having fun, but you have to create that right balance. And I know our department is working alongside the Como community and other places where they've seen a rise in violent crime. And then lastly, I would mention some of this has nothing to do with our police department. It's really the right investments in neighborhood and services. And we had a great presentation for our neighborhood services department last week to discuss what the investments could look like moving forward. And the entire city council is all in lockstep on ensuring that our neighborhoods continue to be flourishing places for families to live in, and understand what it looks like to really drive down violent crime to prevent the type of summer that we had this one.
Is that why there is a pretty sizable increase in the neighborhood city services budget?
Yes, and notably because we're also adding an additional neighborhood to our neighborhood revitalization program. But those investments really pay dividends. They're incredibly popular, of course, in our neighborhoods across the city. But importantly, the true prevention effort around crime starts much earlier. And it's a huge help to our Fort Worth Police Department and is a supplement to our crime control and prevention district and the general fund dollars that go into policing already.
And I know we've been talking a lot about public safety as it relates to the police department, the fire department, 76 new positions. Why is that so important to the city?
Well, number one is, again, public safety. Our fire department has worked really closely with city manager's office to make sure we're not putting too much of a burden on our firefighters. And that was the case. Many of our firefighters are working tremendous amount of overtime to help serve the department and the stations across the city of Fort Worth. And we are 350 square miles across our city, and our stations and our individual firefighters needed help. And we believe that this is the right number of firefighters to add and really meet the needs of our community. That helps with response times and services. And again, our fire department works alongside MedStar to make sure our first responder network is strong. And we think this is the right number to add. And that doesn't mean that we'll stop there. You know, year over year, what does it look like to make sure the department continues to have the manpower that they need?
I wanted to ask you about parks, and this is something we're hearing more about, not only in Fort Worth, but other cities too. And what is I know it's, you want to make the city more green. And so what should people know about the city's plan?
Well, I think the plan is really not just for the city of Fort Worth. Within the city, we have our Parks Department, who does an excellent job managing our park system. But you also have our open space initiative that we've created in partnership with the Trust for Public Land. But we need to do more, candidly. We have an open space. We have just over 250 acres currently in the open space program, soon to be just over 400 with some additional acquisitions that are happening. But let me put it in numbers for you. The city of Fort Worth is only half developed, Jack. And we know right now over 100,000 acres that are undeveloped in the city of Fort Worth. And we need to make sure we're not paving paradise and set really bold vision and goals in cooperation with our other partners, both Tarrant County, our other municipalities across the county that touch Fort Worth, Tarrant Regional Water District, and others, to make sure we're preserving green space and open space for future generations. And it can all be a network around the Trinity River and our trail system, our park system. But in my opinion, what we've been missing in the city of Fort Worth is the right private-public partnership to help to set those bold visions, and we'll be laying those out in the next few months.
So is that like a master plan of this undeveloped space?
It doesn't really need to be master plan necessarily. I mean, first of all, we have a lot of master plans ongoing right now. The Tarrant Regional Water District is undertaking a new recreation master plan. We're doing an update to our parks master plan. You have the city's comprehensive planning process that's ongoing. You also have individual plans like the update to Gateway Park. How do you create a framework for all of those different initiatives and plans in place to make sure they don't sit on a shelf? But at the same time, because we're developing so quickly, 50 acres per week, is being developed in the city of Fort Worth. You have to set development plans, a comprehensive plan that's incredibly bold, working with development services and candidly working with development and landowners to make them understand this is in their best interest as well to preserve open space and green space, not just for what their development looks like, but for the entire city.
And my last question to you is, and you spoke a little bit about this before, as a high growth city, Fort Worth is the 13th largest city in the United States. And
Yes.
so if my numbers are correct, you're just under 1 million people, forecast by the city to go over 1 million people in 2025. And I'm wondering, when you look out at the next 10 years or so, you know, where is the population headed? I mean, how many, you said that they grow by every 5 years by how many people?
100,000 people.
100,000. Okay. So in 10 years, that's 200,000 people, right?
Right.
So I'm wondering, you know, in some cities, Houston, even in Dallas, there are some concerns being expressed right now that their budgets, those city budgets are really on a cliff right now because they're unsustainable because of the growth. Here you have a problem. Those cities are not high growing, you know, the outer communities are, but I'm wondering, what's the balance between, you know, making sure the services are there to respond to all the people coming into the city at the same time, not going over the cliff?
Yeah. Well, that's why I referred to the budget can't be siloed in one fiscal year. You have to think about how are we building a foundation year over year, continue to lower the tax rate, lessen the burden as much as possible on taxpayers, but at the same time provide the services that are optimal for all of our residents. The goal is high quality of life for everyone in every single aspect of how the city serves people. So that can be incredibly difficult, and it is a balance. Across the city of Fort Worth, I think you're seeing a lot of high growth in the northern part of our city, north of 820. Also to the west, out towards Walsh Ranch into Aledo ISD, and that line we cross between Parker County and Tarrant County, and also down south along the Chisholm Trail is a high growth corridor as well. You also have density that is happening within the loop of 820. I try to break this down for residents. It's kind of the tale of two cities. You have a more historic city that's established within the loop, and then you have new growth happening outside of that. And every single department has to plan for this, whether it's our libraries understanding what growth looks like there and how you plan for the next bond election to build more capital projects, fire stations included, making sure you have enough officers for response times, making sure transportation infrastructure is a predominant concern for most residents across the city of Fort Worth, or anybody honestly in North Texas. And those projects are not funded just by the city of Fort Worth. That takes careful collaboration by Tarrant County, the North Central Texas Council of Governments, led by Michael Morris, of course, TxDOT, and then federal grant programs that are passed through, usually through North Central Texas Council of Governments and TxDOT. So these are complicated things to work on together, and it takes an incredible amount of vision, not just from a mayor and council, but also from city managers and other local leaders to make sure we're headed in the right direction. In terms of a cliff stopping us from growth, I don't see that happening. Neither does any demographer. The high growth opportunities in Tarrant County, people want to live here. And when I meet someone new to Fort Worth, I'm always struck by the conversation of what brought them here in the first place and how much they love living in this community, no matter where they came from. And we want that to continue. And you want to make sure that Fort Worth still remains a large city with a small town feel. And right now it does do that because of our investment in neighborhoods, but we have to remain vigilant.
Fort Worth Mayor Mattie Parker, thank you so much. We appreciate your time. We covered a lot of ground today. Thank you.
Thanks, Jack. I appreciate you.
Coming up, we take a closer look at the 2024 Republican presidential primary and the potential impact former President Donald Trump's decision not to take part in the first debate will have on the race. Eye on Politics on CBS News Texas returns in a moment. Republican presidential candidates squared off in their first debate without the frontrunner, former President Donald Trump. We spoke with SMU political science professor Matthew Wilson about what it means for the other candidates and the primary in general going forward. SMU political science professor Matthew Wilson, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it. So as you know, former President Donald Trump did not take part in the first Republican presidential debate. Instead, he did an interview with Tucker Carlson. What impact do you think his decision will have going forward on the primary and just the rest of the field?
Well, I think he can afford to not be in the debates. He has a huge lead in the Republican primary right now, so I don't think he'll be deeply hurt by his decision not to participate. What it does is open up a little more space for other contenders to make their cases. And that gave an opportunity in the debate for other contenders in the absence of Donald Trump to explain their vision for the party, their vision for America, et cetera. Any event in which Donald Trump participates becomes inevitably about Donald Trump. And when you have a lot of contenders who are trying to break out of the low single digits, they may welcome the absence of the 800-pound gorilla.
But the pressure is on these other candidates, right, to have a breakthrough moment, certainly in the first debate, but then going forward as well. Because if that doesn't happen, what happens to them and how quickly?
Yeah, they have to differentiate themselves from the pack relatively soon. Right now, you've got Trump way out ahead. Then you have Ron DeSantis and surprisingly Vivek Ramaswamy, both polling at around 10 to 15%. And then everybody else is below 5%. And that below 5% pack needs to start sorting itself out. Those people pretty soon are going to have to start emerging from the scrum if they're going to attract significant financial support. They're going to bring donors on board. In the run up to Iowa, that's what they're going to be trying to do. And they're going to need to resonate with a message that probably distinctively criticizes Joe Biden, because it's been shown that there's not much hay to be made by criticizing Donald Trump in Republican primaries. There's just too much loyalty to Trump among the Republican base.
So how do they separate themselves from Trump if they, if criticizing him doesn't necessarily go over too well? At some point, though, they're in this race because they don't believe that the former president can win in a general election against Biden, right?
Right, or that they believe that they would just be better to win in a general election against Biden, or that they'd be a better president. But what they're going to have to signal, all of these contenders, is that while they largely respect and agree with the things that Trump did when he was president, that they are a better, fresher, newer face with less baggage to take on Joe Biden in 2024. Now, they have the advantage of that largely being true. And if they can get that message to resonate with Republican primary voters, then they have a chance to break through. But we've seen in Republican primary after Republican primary that the path is not through attacking Donald Trump. It's tipping the cap to Donald Trump, respecting him for what he's done, but then talking about oneself and explaining why I am the perfect candidate to take on Joe Biden in 2020.
And what do you make of just the state of the race? Because when you look at all the recent polls, Trump is ahead by at least 40 percentage points. DeSantis is second. Ramaswamy has come up as well, being the closest to DeSantis. And so I'm wondering what you make of that. I mean, it seems as if, he's holding on despite the fourth indictment being charged and filed against him.
Well, and he's holding on in the Republican primary, not despite that, but in many ways because of that. That is, the various indictments have strengthened Trump's hand in the Republican primary, because among Republican base, the perception is that Trump is being unjustly persecuted. And every new indictment, every new criminal proceeding by the federal government against Donald Trump simply reinforces that sense of grievance and of sympathy with Trump among the Republican base. So in the wake of the Georgia indictments, his lead over Ron DeSantis in Iowa expanded by 5 points. So the indictments are not hurting him at all, at least yet, among Republican primary voters. And that state of the race right now makes him the runaway front runner, but with the caveat that we are talking about someone in his late 70s with 4 criminal indictments looming over him. So it certainly does give the others reasons to stick around.
I was going to ask you about that, because what does it say about the other candidates in the field that, aside from DeSantis and in some polls Ramaswamy, everybody is in the single digits? So what does this say about the rest of the field? On one hand, it's early in the process. But on the other hand, the trends are the trends.
Right. Well, what it says is that largely this race is all about Donald Trump. It's all a referendum on Donald Trump. Do you want him as the standard bearer or not? And only if you say not, do you then begin to think about the different alternatives. But in many ways, that becomes an afterthought. Most Republican primary voters do not know anything about most of these people. Most primary voters around the country have only the vaguest notion of who Tim Scott or Nikki Haley or Chris Christie or Asa Hutchinson or any of these people are. We can sometimes tend to exaggerate the level of knowledge about politics that American voters have, but those outside the sort of political pundit class have a relatively limited attention window for politics. And Trump dwarfs everybody else in terms of name recognition. There's considerable fondness for him in the Republican base, and there's an increasing perception that he is being unjustly persecuted and vilified by the Biden administration, and that creates the wagons effect. So it's playing out very well for him.
And what do you make of Florida Governor Ron DeSantis? His campaign has had to change campaign managers. They've had to cut staff. Has this been a surprise to you, given all of the buildup for him joining the race and taking on Trump?
That has been a bit of a surprise because his campaign was so dominant in terms of re-election to the Florida governorship last year. Ron DeSantis has essentially crushed the Democratic Party in Florida. He has made the Republican Party absolutely dominant in what was until very recently a swing state. And that gave him a certain amount of momentum. And early this year, he was polling quite strongly in a lot of surveys against Donald Trump. And that has really receded, in part because of the circle the wagons, rally around Trump effect produced by the indictments, but also because DeSantis has struggled to articulate a very clear, coherent message that is the kind of anti-wokeness, anti-Disney crusades. Those only have taken him so far, and he has thus far kind of lacked a comprehensive message about why he's the better choice than Donald Trump. And that's what I think he'll try to articulate tonight to try to get the campaign back on track.
And at some point, though, do the contributors, the big fundraisers, start raising questions, did I bet on the wrong candidate?
They do. I mean, I don't think we're there yet, but certainly as we get into those early primary states, caucus and primary states, Iowa, New Hampshire, et cetera, if DeSantis does not start to coalesce the non-Trump vote behind himself to a much greater degree than he's polling right now, then I think some of those donors are going to start to lose their enthusiasm.
SMU political science professor Matthew Wilson, thank you as always. We appreciate your insight.
Well, thanks for having me.
That's all for Eye on Politics this week. I'm Jack Fink. Thank you so much for joining us, and we hope to see you again next week. You're watching CBS News Texas.